Walter Grant hadn't moved the van in 14 years, and he never planned to. It sat faithfully at the end of the driveway, like a rusted-out soldier on post front wheels turned just slightly to the right, the way Marion had left them the last time she parked. It the Aaron Hearth Ford had, that crisp bite of late October, where the sunlight stayed low and golden all morning before slipping behind the-oak trees by late afternoon. Leaves skittered across the pavement like tiny messengers whispering winter's approach. Walter, bundled in his navy peak coat, reached down for the newspaper resting on the porch step. The top page crinkled. In the breeze, he folded it neatly, tucked it under his arm, and stepped back inside. To the smell of percolated coffee and old wood polish, he poured a cup into his favorite chipped mug and settled at table beside the salt shaker and ceramic napkin holder sat a familiar envelope, cream-colored logo in blue ink. Hartford Homeowners Association. He didn't open it. It joined the others in a stack clipped to the fridge, each unopened, each accusing him silently from across the kitchen, just like every Thursday by 8:15. Walter was locking the front door and making his way down Sycamore Avenue toward Maple Diner. The cold nudged him to pick up the pace, though his gait remained deliberate. Hearth Ford was still waking up. Curtains shifted behind frosted windows, sprinklers clicked on with slow arcs, across lawns manicured to perfection. The only thing out of place was Walter's driveway, where the Dodge Ram, painted in fading white with a stripe the color of pumpkin flesh, stood proudly among the beige uniformity inside the diner. Gloria poured his coffee before he even reached his usual booth. "Morning, Walter," she said with a wink. "Your seat's still warm." "Ah, that's because I left part of myself here yesterday," he replied. With a soft smile, she placed a slice of apple pie in front of him and dropped 2 creamers beside the cup. "Your friend Karen stopped by this morning." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Friends?" A strong word. She was in a mood, Gloria added, leaning on the counter. "Something about visual harmony," said. "Your van's disrupting the aesthetic cohesion of the neighborhood." "Is that right?" Walter said, cutting into the pie. "I always thought it brought a bit of character." "Character makes her witchy," Gloria said. "Anyway, just thought you should know." He gave her a grateful nod and finished his coffee, slowly taking in the quiet rhythm of the diner, the hum of conversation, the scrape-off forks on porcelain, the warmth of familiarity. Gloria had been serving Harris since '98, and she still remembered he didn't like whipped cream on his P.O. When he returned home, Walter stood beside the van and ran his fingers along the edge of the hood. The paint had dulled, but he kept it waxed. The chrome was still bright around the edges, and the tires hadn't cracked, thanks to monthly checks. He leaned against the driver's door and opened it. The inside smelled like aged leather and road trips. Hanging from the visor was a faded photograph. Marion, barefoot and smiling, perched on the hood in 1991. Waving at the camera in front of Lake George. Walter chuckled under his breath. "You'd have something to say about all this," he murmured. He sat in the van for a while, letting the quiet sink in. The world outside had gone quiet, too. A squirrel darted across the driveway and a mail truck pulled up down the street. Walter leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the cold plastic of the seat cushion press into his coat. Later, he walked the perimeter of the property, raking a few scattered leaves and checking the front gutter when he passed by Millier's yard. She waved him over. "You see the latest letter?" she asked, still wearing gardening gloves. "It's on the table," he replied. She mentioned the word blight at the community board last night. "She's fond of dramatic nouns," Walter said dryly. "You going to fight it?" Millie tilted her head. Walter shrugged. "Depends what fight means these days. She doesn't like anything that doesn't match the hoe pamphlet." Millie took off one glove and touched his arm gently. "But that van of yours is history, Walter. It belongs here." He nodded, though he didn't say anything. They stood like that for a few quiet moments before Millie excused herself to finish trimming her rose bushes. That afternoon, Walter returned to the kitchen and picked up the envelope once again, slid his finger beneath the flap, and unfolded the neatly typed letter. "Your property remains in violation of Section 3 of the Hartford Ford Homeowner Aesthetic Code. All vehicles must maintain visual harmony with the neighborhood's agreed standards. Non-compliance will incur a fine of $100 per day effective 7 days. From the date of this notice, no greeting, no signature, just rules. He reread the phrase visual harmony 3 times, then set the letter on the counter and stared out the window toward the van. The wind had picked up, nudging a few more leaves from the trees across the street. Karen Middleton's mailbox creaked open as she retrieved her own stack of letters. She glanced over at his house with a pinched expression, then turned and walked briskly back inside. Walter remained, still, then turned toward the hallway. His knees complained as he bent to open the guest room closet. There was a distinct scent of mothballs and old paper, reaching high up to the back shelf. His hand found what it was looking for, had pulled down a heavy volume thick with age and authority. The edges of its faux leather cover worn smooth by time pulls out a thick, dusty book. The HOA book. The van wasn't just a vehicle. It was a promise Walter had made to his wife. On the day Marion signed the papers for hospice, she'd squeezed his hand and said with a smile that had more courage than her bones could carry, keep it running. Even if the world wants to pave over it. He had nodded, fighting the lump in his throat, and never once considered letting it go. Late October had dressed the neighborhood in paper ghosts and plastic pumpkins, Hartfords. Sidewalks were dotted with inflatable black cats and signs that read B in polite serif fonts. The homes, though eerily uniform in beige and taupe, tried their best to be festive. Under the ever-watchful eyes of the HO inside Walter's living room, the smell of liniment and lemon cleaner hung in the air. The fireplace hadn't been lit yet this season, but he'd folded a throw blanket neatly on the arm of their recliner, just in case. The thick HO rule book sat open on the coffee table, pages dog-eared and underlined. Walter leaned over it with a yellow highlighter and a black pen, making small notes in the margin. Section 4. 8 Vehicle maintenance must be visually clean, operable, and parked within property line. Is section 5.1. Aesthetics shall be maintained per community standards, defined by the HOA board, and then curiously buried on page 97. A footnote. Section 9.2. Historical or memorial vehicles may request visual exemption with supporting documentation and board review. He tapped the line with his pen. Memorial. He murmured, didn't think they'd left that in. He picked up the HOA's latest flyer, their website, printed at the bottom, in tiny font, and carefully typed the address into the browser on his dusty desktop. The machine wheezed to life like a reluctant cat on screen. The home page appeared. Hartford HOA, preserving unity and aesthetics. Walter clicked through, tabs titled Hour, Vision Enforcement Policy and Violations and Remedies. All of it read the same, a string of polite words, wrapped tightly around control. Images of smiling families standing beside cookie-cutter homes filled them. Arjun's no one looked over the age of 40. He minimized the screen and leaned back. On the shelf above his desk sat a wooden frame with a photograph of him and Marion Young in uniform cheeks, wind-burned, leaning against the van during their 3rd year of marriage. He reached up and touched the corner of the frame. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps. Millie didn't knock anymore. She nudged the door open with her hip, holding a paper plate covered in foil. I brought cookies, she announced. Oatmeal, your favorite, bless you. Walter said I was just digging through propaganda. Millie set the plate on the eatable and took a seat. Honan sense reading their sacred text here. Plied, gesturing at the rulebook. It's as circular as a merry-go-round. She poured herself a glass of water from the tap without asking, another habit of theirs, and leaned over the open book. What are you looking for? An escape hatch, he said. And I might have found it. Millie studied the page, then looked up at him. If they want rules, give 'em rules. He smiled for the first time. That morning, that night, after Millie had gone home with half the cookies left behind for emergencies, Walter returned to the garage. He flipped on the overhead light and pulled a measuring tape from the workbench drawer. It snapped open with a metallic hiss. He walked slowly around the van, noting dimensions in Asmall spiral notebook with a golf pencil front panel, 54 in passenger side, 96 in rear door, 48. In he jotted notes with a practiced hand, the pencil dark against the yellowed pages. Then he returned inside, settled back at the desktop, and opened a clunky but familiar design program from an icon that hadn't been updated in 5 years with slow precision. He began creating panels of text, bold headers in navy blue body text in clear, legible black. Each rule he planned to print on the wrap came directly from the HOA's own materials, highlighting sections on compliance exemptions and acceptable vehicle dimensions. He formatted citations, inserted borders, and even included the HOA's own logo, legally required on all official documents somewhere near midnight. He rubbed his eyes, saved the file twice, and printed a test page on standard paper. He held it up next to the van side panel and nodded. It would fit the next morning. He took the USB stick to a small print shop in the neighboring town. The owner, a middle-aged man in a trucker cap named Dean, squinted at the file. "Wrap job, huh?" Dean said, scrolling. "You serious about this?" Walter just smiled, dead serious. Dean let out a whistle. "Well, that's a first." He handed over a quote, and estimated delivery should be ready by Tuesday. The voice says Walter grins. Karen Middleton prided herself on order. Walter's van made her eyelid twitch. It wasn't just the vehicle itself, though the boxy shape and faded trim offended her deeply. It was the message it now screamed from every panel. By Monday morning, Walter's driveway had become the most viewed attraction. In Hartford, the van stood boldly in the late October sunlight. Wrapped like municipal sculpture, the vinyl gleamed, clean white edged in navy blue with large print quotations from the HOA laws, aligned edge to edge Section 4. All vehicles must be visually clean, operable, and parked within property lines. Section 9.2. Historical or memorial vehicles may request exemption. Even the HOA logo was included dead center on the passenger door, framed like a crest on a knight's shield. Neighbors stopped to stare. Some took photos. A retired couple walked by with their beagle chuckling softly. "Well, at least now we all know what we're allowed to own." The man joked. Millie arrived with a tin of shortbread and a knowing smirk. "You did it," she said, eyes dancing. "You really did it." Walter nodded once without stepping away from the van. He stood beside it like a docent in front of a monument, calm and observant. It didn't take long. By noon, Karen appeared on the sidewalk, arms folded, clipboard tucked beneath one elbow like a saber she wore, a pressed beige blazer and flats that matched her purse, a woman dressed for righteous battle. Her eyes locked on Walter as she marched up his front path, heels tapping the cement like a countdown. "What is this?" she demanded, gesturing at the van. Walter looked her in the eye. "Compliance." She glanced at the nearest panel and blinked, then leaned closer. Her mouth opened shut, opened again. "You can't just, this isn't." Walter held up a printed copy of Section 9.2, two highlighted in yellow historical exemption clause. He said, his voice even, also, "Nowhere in your bylaws does it forbid visual display of the bylaws themselves." Karen's face wrined, but she smiled thin and strained. "Well, see what the board thinks." He shrugged by. Evening, a typed notice appeared in his mailbox. Emergency Resolution 14B vehicle. Removal due to immediate aesthetic disruption. Authorized action towing. Within 48 hours, the paper was crisp. Think fresh it bore Karen's signature. Walter read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it on the kitchen table beside the cookies Millie had brought earlier. He turned off the light and sat in the dim glow of a floor lamp, staring at the van through the front window. At 8:30. A knock came at the door. He opened it to find a tall, thin man in his 30s, dark hair, long coat, hands in his pocket. Looked vaguely familiar. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," the man said. "I'm Tommy Middleton." Walter tilted his head slightly. "Karen's son." Tommy nodded. "Mind if I speak with you a moment?" Walter stepped aside. They sat in the porch, each facing the street. The wrapped van reflected the porch, light like polished bone. "I used to play inside that van," Tommy said after a pause. "When I was 7, you gave me half a peanut butter sandwich and let me honk the horn." "Oh." Walter let out a soft chuckle. "You left crumbs in the glove box." Tommy smiled faintly, then grew quiet again. "I don't agree with what my mother's doing," he said. "Not anymore. I've seen the budget reports, the meetings, This isn't about a Van anymore, Walter." Waited. She doesn't see it. Tommy continued to her. "The rules are the point, not the people." Walter nodded slowly as if confirming a suspicion he'd kept to himself. "I just wanted you to know," Tommy said, standing. "I don't think. You're wrong." He left without asking for anything. And Walter sat there a while, longer, watching the shadows stretch across the lawn. That night he opened his file cabinet and retrieved the official HOA complaint form, the one they always told residents to use. But rarely did he fill it out by hand, carefully citing Section 2. 3 Abuse of discretionary power by board members. The next morning, the delivery boy pedaled up Sycamore Avenue, tossing newspapers with practiced flick zone, landed in Millier's hedge. Another hit the edge of Walter's lawn. A manila envelope rested quietly on Karen Middleton's front porch, sealed with the emblem of the county. The next morning, a manila envelope arrives at Karen's door. With her name and a county seal, it started with a chuckle. Then came the birdhouses by the time the morning fog had lifted from. Hartford's tree-lined streets. Walter's van had become something of a town attraction, not for its age or design, but for the audacity of it. Every inch wrapped in legal text, quoting the HOA's own regulations with the precision of a courtroom exhibit. It didn't take long before others began to notice and imitate. Millie had been the first, of course. One afternoon, she strolled past Walter's driveway, hands tucked into a cardigan, with her nose pink from the chill, and said through a grin, "Well, if your van breaks the rules, so does my flamingo planter." That evening, a small sign appeared in her yard, staked beside her plastic flamingo. In accordance with HOA Clause 3.6, lawn ornaments are permissible under 30 in by the weekend. More signs cropped up across the neighborhood like dandelions in early spring. Except it was November, and they're a bit cold against collars and cheeks. Mr. Carter, the retired mailman with Olymp, had mounted a wooden plaque to his mailbox post per HOA Regulation 4. This structure is under 42 in height. He stood beside it proudly one morning, arms crossed, nodding at passers-by, who gave thumbs up and warm laughs outside Paul's barber shop. A laminated sign now hung in the window as per HOA Regulation 12.4. This window sign is 8'5". In tall, Paul had even added a small ruler beneath it. Just for show, Walter watched the change unfold from his porch. A steaming cup of tea warming his hands. The fog hadn't fully cleared, and he liked it that way. Like the town itself was deciding what to reveal. And when Elva from down the street stopped by with a loaf of pumpkin bread wrapped in foil, "Thought you could do something sweet," she said, setting it down. Walter nodded with a half-smile. "You painted your birdhouse." Elva beamed, matching HOA-approved colors. "And look," she said, pulling a folded paper from her coat, attached a list of approved paint codes from the handbook, just taped it underneath. He chuckled genuinely. "You're braver than most." She leaned closer. "They can't find us for following the rules too well, but not everyone was amused. Karen Middleton had called an emergency HOA meeting 2 days earlier. Only 8 people showed up, 2 of them left before it ended." She stood at the podium in the rec center, her voice clipped and too loud for the low ceiling room, pointing at grainy photographs of the van, the flamingo, the signs. "This," she declared, "is not how our respectable neighborhood presents itself." Someone from the back mumbled, "Looks pretty respectable to me." Karen didn't hear, or maybe she did. After the meeting, Tommy pulled his mother aside in the parking lot. She brushed him off with a sharp glance. "Don't start," she snapped, before he'd even spoken. "These people don't understand what's at stake." "They seem to understand just fine," he said softly. She turned away, muttering about ungrateful neighbors and the decay of standards Tommy didn't push. Not yet. But that night he sat at his kitchen table, flipping through digital files he'd downloaded months ago. Budget approvals, scanned invoices, copies of board meeting minutes. Something wasn't sitting right. Meanwhile, Walter had made a quiet addition to his front porch. A small black camera nestled above the porch light, angled discreetly toward the driveway, too. More appeared under the eaves by morning. No one commented. He also filled out a report addressed to the township notice of Ruly enforcement dispute. He didn't tell. Millie, he didn't tell anyone that sometime past midnight, long after the last porch lights had gone out and only the rhythmic squeak of frost stiffened. Tree branches broke the silence. Thievens' motion light flicked on. 2. Shadows moved quickly. Figures in dark hoodies, one holding what looked like a scraper. The sound of peeling vinyl echoed. Faintly, they worked in haste, one tugging at a corner of the wrap, the other shoving crumpled pieces into a plastic bag. The porch camera clicked once. Then again, then 3 more times by 6 a.m. Walter had already reviewed the footage by 7 a.m. It had been clipped, zipped, and uploaded by 8:15 a.m. He'd sent an email to a local news outlet subject. Potential HOA vandalism, video attached at 9:02 a.m. His inbox pinged with a response. Walter reads the line blinking once before nodding to himself. "We want thestery." The folding chairs squeak-ached louder than the complaints. The community hall smelled faintly of burnt coffee and decades of carpet cleaner. A familiar cocktail in Hearthford fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a flat white glow on the plastic tables set. In a horseshoe in the center sat Karen Middleton, lips pursed, clipboard, balance, on her lap like a gavel of her own, making her. Blazer was a deeper beige than usual, perhaps a signal of escalation. Walter entered quietly and made his way to the second row. Millie was already there, seated next to a retired mechanic named Bud and Mrs. Connolly, the widowed librarian who now wore HOA free pins on her purse straps. Tommy slipped in a few minutes later, unnoticed by most, and sat along the back wall, his eyes calm but unblinking. Karen cleared her throat into the microphone. "Thank you all for attending this emergency HOA session. I'll remind everyone that we are here to address a serious violation affecting the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood." A few murmurs followed. The folding chairs squirmed beneath shifting bodies. No one asked what violation. Everyone already knew. Karen stood, eyes scanning the crowd. "Mr. Walter Grant has refused multiple notices and openly mocked HOA regulations by displaying unauthorized material across his vehicle. This behavior is inflammatory and undermines their respectability. We've all worked so hard to maintain." Walter said nothing. Instead, he reached into his worn briefcase and pulled out a small flash drive. Bud leaned forward with interest as Walter walked to the front of the room. "I'd like to respond," Walter said evenly. Karen's hand hovered over the microphone switch. "This isn't a debate." Walter turned to the projector cart behind him and plugged in the device. "Then it'll be short." The screen came alive with a time-stamped video. A motion-activated camera feed played out in grainy clarity, 2 figures in dark clothes scraping vinyl from the side of the van. A foot slipped, a hood fell. A familiar face from the HOA board appeared. A few gasps escaped the room. Walter tapped a page clip to the front of the projector. According to Section 9(2), vandalism of private property, especially when committed under false authority, is a violation of HOA bylaws and state law. Karen shifted in her seat. "We don't even know when that video was recorded. It was the night after your emergency notice," Walter said. "Time-stamped. Archived," reported. Millie stood slowly. Her voice was soft but firm. "I've lived next to Walter for 22 years. That van has never been anything but a memory. He took my late husband to the VA hospital and it brought groceries to the Andersons when their car broke down. If that's not harmony in this community." "I don't know. What is a quiet applause spread before?" Karen tapped her microphone face. "Stiff, we are here to preserve order, not stories," she snapped. Someone stood near the back, a young woman, holding a clipboard. "I have a petition." Karen froze. "We've gathered 132 signatures." The woman continued. "We request immediate suspension of fines against Mr. Grant and review of HOA leadership transparency, including access to budget records." Karen opened her mouth, but Tommy beat her to it. He stepped forward from the back carrying a slim leather portfolio. He didn't look at his mother. He placed a stack of documents on the front table. These are the last 6 months of HOA expenditures, he said, voice low, 3 invoices. For the same landscaping, work, no meeting minutes, approving them, check signed by 1 person. Karen's eyes widened, but still, she tried to keep her composure. This is all theatrics, you people are sheep. The room fell silent. A beat later, a pair of figures stepped just inside the doors, shoulder cameras, notepads, press badges. One raised a microphone gently. Mrs. Middleton, the reporter said, "Is this how HOA power works?" Karen always said the books were clean. She just forgot we could read the Hartford Public. Library didn't see much foot traffic on Sundays, especially when the church crowd had already moved on to brunch, but tucked in the back corner beneath a buzzing fluorescent light and a shelf labeled local history, 3 figures leaned over a table spread, with spreadsheets, printed emails, and a binder labeled HOA Quarterly Reports 2020 to 2023. Walter adjusted his reading glasses and tapped a column with a pencil. 3 separate invoices, he muttered, all under sidewalk, beautification, and all within 6 weeks of each other. Millie peered at the printout. That section of sidewalk only got touched once, I remember, because I tripped over the cones for a week. She sniffed, unimpressed. Look under sidewalk. Beautification, that's always where they hide things, Tommy. Flipped another page. His expression had shifted. In recent days, less passive, more determined. Here's the vendor, Penland. Paving, he opened his laptop and typed quickly, registered to a Glenn Middleton. Didn't flinch when he said it. Walter raised an eyebrow. Relation, Tommy nodded, second cousin, distant enough for plausible deniability, close enough to raise eyebrows. Millie opened a second binder, running her finger down a page of minutes. There's no meeting logged for March yet. One of the invoices is dated March 3rd. Nothing in the April note. Scyther Walter leaned back. Then, how did she authorize the payment? Tommy pulled a thin folder from his bag. I requested internal emails last week. HOA bylaws require the board to retain all correspondence for 5 years. He spread out the pages here. Karen instructs the treasurer to process the invoice under discretionary beautification funds. No vote, no signature except hers. Millie let out a low whistle. That's bold. Even for her, they worked until the library lights flickered, signaling closing time. By then, they had a stack of documents thick enough to rival a paperback novel. Back at Walter's house, the kettle whistled. Gently on the stove, he poured hot water over a pair of tea bags and mismatched mugs. One chipped the other. Reading World's veteran. They sat at the kitchen table while Tommy laid out their findings in a careful timeline. 3 payments. Tommy said all to relatives, no board approval, duplicate service, claims, inflated cost estimates. Walter sipped his tea. That sidewalk must be paved in. Gold, Millie chuckled. It still floods every time it rains. Tommy tapped the edge of their port. We have enough here for public scrutiny, maybe even legal. Walter looked out the window toward the van. Then it's time. That night he sent an email to the Hartford Gazette, subject line, pattern of misconduct, HOA expense audit findings. The reply came within the hour. We're interested. Can we meet tomorrow at the Monday morning farmer's market? Walter stood beside a folding table loaded with produce and fresh bread. The Gazette reporter arrived in a tweed coat, notebook in hand. Shaking Walter's hand firmly, he showed the folder, explained. The timeline let the documents speak for themselves. The reporter's pen scribbled non-stop. By Tuesday morning, the headline stretched across the Gazette's front page. HOA under fire. Is this power or abuse? The photo underneath showed Thievin glinting under autumn sun with its wrap fully intact. Later that day, Karen Middleton opened her mailbox. Tucked between a real estate flyer and a utility bill was a thick envelope with a county seal. Karen Nan Thursday True Tap to Tokem Thong Bears. Karen always walked like the whole town owed her a thank you today. She shuffled. The courthouse wasn't grand, just 3 floors of brick and pride wedged between the county assessor's office and a bakery that still sold molasses cookies in wax paper. The flag out front barely moved in the stillness of early winter, though the wind carried the kind of cold that settled deep in the bones. Karen arrived just Before Nine Shoulders squared in a pale gray suit that didn't quite hide the tremble in her hands, the heels that once struck. Pavement like a judge's gavel now clicked uncertainly, her purse swung awkwardly at her side, too heavy or too empty. No one could tell. Inside, the bench squeaked as she sat behind the defense table alone. But for a lawyer 2 seats away flipping through manila folders, with methodical indifference across the aisle, a city official stood ready with a binder. It stabs, fan-like. Accusation. Walter didn't attend. He sat in his living room wrapped in an old Afghan Marion had crocheted in '82, a mug of weak coffee cradled in both hands. The television flickered in soft color, local news covering the hearing live. Millie was in the crowd outside. The courthouse bundled in a scarf and holding a sign. Someone had painted in neat block letters, "Rules are for all of us, the hearing." Began without ceremony. The judge read the charges evenly: misappropriation of HOA funds, falsification of public meeting, records, violation of state-level transparency laws. Karen sat still, lips pressed so tightly they seemed painted. On her attorney whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. Then Tommy stood. He walked to the witness stand, with quiet purpose, no coat, no tie, just a navy sweater. And that expression of someone who'd already made peace with the fallout. "She taught me to follow rules," he said, voice steady. "Taught me that order mattered, but this wasn't order. It was control." He placed a slim folder in front of the clerk. "These are internal documents she kept at home. Budgets, email drafts, signed forms. None of them were submitted through official channels." Karen blinked once sharply. The courtroom remained silent outside. The crowd grew, more signs lifted above. Knith hats and gloved hands. Some read accountability as harmony. Others just said, "Thank you, Walter." "Lo." The judge nodded, slowly. "Due to the volume and credibility of the submitted evidence, the HOA board is suspended pending full investigation. Furthermore, this court recommends immediate audit oversight in collaboration with the IRS." Karen finally looked up, her face pale, her jaw set, but there was no fire left. Just smoke. Reporters clustered at the building's exit when Karen stepped out into the late morning. Gray microphones shot toward her like spiked flowers. "Mrs. Middleton," one asked, "do you still believe the van was the problem?" She didn't answer. Her heels clicked once, twice, then scuffed. She stepped off the curb into the cold wind and kept walking. That night, porch lights glowed across Hartford. A few folks gathered at Paul's barber shop for cider and quiet conversation. Millie stopped by. Walter stowed drop off a slice of pumpkin pie, though he never asked for it at 10:12 p.m. A white plastic sign appeared in front of the Middleton house. It stood crooked under the porch light. The words stark and simple: "For sale by owner Toy Hamdu Tambion, for sale. Jian Truak Narin, Sang Ham Sao Kat Trong Kong," on that crisp November day. As the music faded and flags fluttered in the breeze, Hartford didn't just celebrate a veteran, it honored a voice that refused to be quieted. A van once labeled Aniasor had become a beacon of memory, resilience, and quiet rebellion. The lesson was clear. When power becomes blind, it takes just one clear-eyed neighbor and a community willing to stand behind him to pull back the curtain. Rules should protect, not punish, and when they're twisted, justice has a way of unwrapping them. One clause at a time, perhaps. It's never too late to stand your ground or to roll forward in something worth remembering, like a well-worn van, parked with purpose. Dignity doesn't need permission.